Good morning, ladies and gentlemen in the media. Welcome to our post-cabinet briefing. This morning, the brief will be done by Minister of Governance, Honorable Raphael Trotman. Mr. Trotman.
Morning, members of the media. Mr. Archer, morning, everyone. Thank you for being here on time, and I'm happy that we can start, in fact, on time, in fact, a bit earlier. On behalf of the Minister of State, I will be doing the briefing following Cabinet's meeting yesterday. And as is customary, the briefing will be just that, a brief, followed by questions, and we'll proceed as planned. First matter I wish to bring to your attention, of course, is to let you know that Cabinet was updated yesterday by His Excellency the President about his recent visit to Washington, D.C., where he held discussions with the Department of State, more particularly with the Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Activities and Affairs, Ms. Roberta Jacobson. Meetings were held with her, and thereafter His Excellency delivered what is commonly known as the keynote address at the graduation ceremony for the Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies. His Excellency was himself an adjunct professor at that institution for a number of years, and a graduate, and is a fellow of the Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies. So that was successfully completed, and I believe Guyana has done itself proud once again, because a graduate and former professor is now a head of state. Second matter I wish to report on is that Cabinet considered a proposal, or rather several options, for the reduction of tolls on the Berbice Bridge, more or better known as the Berbice Bridge Company Incorporated, or its formal name. Cabinet considered a proposal by the Honorable Minister of Finance for the reduction of tolls to cross the Berbice River Bridge. It was agreed after much discussion that the tolls will be reduced in keeping with the new administration's first 100-day plan. The Honorable Minister of Finance in due course will announce the details on this matter in his national budget presentation. A third matter that came up for discussion and for decision was that we approved the attendance of Ms. Anita Wilson, who is a representative from the Civil Defense Commission, to attend a workshop being held in Barbados in August. This workshop is intended to allow national disaster organizations such as ours to have a working knowledge of the response mechanisms employed by the Caribbean Development Bank to support vulnerable communities of borrowing countries, of which Guyana is one. This training, of course, comes on the heels of recent floods experienced by Guyana, more so on the coast, and in our efforts to both recognize the good work of the CDC and to support that good work, we believe that Ms. Wilson's training should be approved to augment the work, because of course flooding, heavy rains, or changing weather patterns and heavy rains and flooding now seem to be a feature of modern day life in Guyana. Fourthly, Cabinet also considered a draft code of conduct for ministers of government and members of the National Assembly and public office holders. This draft was circulated and is under active discussion, of course, and will be discussed and settled at a retreat of Cabinet that is to be held later in the month of August, within the next 3 weeks. So that is to be approved shortly. Fifth matter for consideration, in anticipation of our Emancipation Day activities on Saturday, Cabinet has approved funds to be distributed amongst active African groups across the country to allow them to host Emancipation Day activities in their respective communities. This is in keeping with the government's commitment to the promotion of cultural activities which remind us of the contributions of all our ancestors to the nation's development. The efforts by the Ministry of Education's Department of Culture to engage the groups that have organized Emancipation Day activities in an attempt to help them to plan effectively was lauded by Cabinet. And lastly, Cabinet received a strong brief from the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs regarding the payment of fees by Guyanese law students to the Hugh Wooding Law School. This matter was discussed fully, and it was agreed that the Honorable Minister of Legal Affairs and Attorney General would further pronounce on this matter at a press conference which he is to hold. That is the brief. Thank you very much. As I said, it will be brief.
Sir, funding for active African groups, commitment to cultural groups, and all of that. Now, when the government decides to allocate fundings to certain organizations, you spoke about upgrading the state houses, sorry. The opposition is saying that you're extravagant. How do you respond to the allegations that the government has been extremely extravagant, hosting birthday parties for the president, which Minister Rui says he doesn't have to believe when you say it was funded by overseas and all of this. How extravagant is this government?
Well, I don't know how one defines extravagance. One only has to visit the home of any one former minister to know what extravagance looks like. We believe that state houses, being just as described, are property of the state and need to be refurbished where necessary. We're speaking here about the parliament buildings and its environs. We're speaking about magistrates' courts, the High Court in New Amsterdam and the High Court in Georgetown and in Essequibo. We're speaking about regional democratic councils offices. These are institutions that represent the people of Guyana and are not to appear in a derelict state. We're speaking about guest houses, regional guest houses, which have been with us from colonial days and coming forward. So there's nothing irregular or extravagant about just fixing the gutters or putting a coat of paint or replacing rotting boards. I believe the matter of the President's birthday has been dealt with by other colleagues. It was hosted and fully funded by friends of the President. He's entitled to friends, as were other presidents who seem to have good friends who do construction and so for them. So there's nothing, again, extravagant or irregular about the President's birthday. So, again, whether it be Mr. Rohi or any other person, they're entitled to their frivolous opinions, and we have serious work to do here, and we're doing that serious work.
Certainly, very thanks for you spoke about these reference tolls. There were arguments in the past that that company is a private company. Obviously, by the fact that you just announced, is it that the government has taken it, or that it's a public-private partnership?
Well, yes, it is a private company, but there is legislation that pronounces on that company and the setting of fares and so forth. So government is not going to dictate, but government is going to negotiate with the company the idea of perhaps a subsidy that will ensure that the tolls are lowered. We have no intention of interfering with companies' right to a rate of fair and favorable rate of return on their investments. But we believe as a responsible government, we do have a right to represent the people, and we've heard the cries of the people of Regions 6 and 5 in particular, who demand a lowering. And if the company is unable to do so, government feels that it should step in to work with the company to see how we could literally relieve the burden of the cost, the heavy cost of travel across that bridge.
And in the same way, sir, AHI, we see that there's a board that has been named. Could you say what stands with regards to the private public, especially with the fact that somebody from GTP may have gone to that?
GT&T? Well, the new board would, of course, has been named for the AHI, the Atlantic Hotels Incorporated, more popularly known as the Marriott Hotel. The new board will be tasked, of course, with the responsibility of uncovering and unearthing all the arrangements, contractual and otherwise, all commitments that are in place that have to be honored, and those, of course, which there's no support and documentation for, which will not be honored. If GT&T has made an investment as a private company, that's its right, and in fact, it is for them to pronounce. But once it has been done according to law, it will be recognized.
So there's it's
the share sales.
Well,
government sale of shares in GTP when
You mean when the shares were sold of GT&T? Well, these are things, as I said, that the new board will be tasked to unearth and to manage, because we have inherited a company with a structure that has really been funded by taxpayers. We were led to believe that it was a privately owned venture, but it would appear that each one of us has a stake. In fact, we should all demand a night fully paid for, with meals and everything at that hotel at each Guyanese, I think, because we are all stakeholders. But the new board, I believe, will look to see how it can be made viable, and if not, to see how it could be liquidated so that government removes its participation in the hoteling or hotel business. In few countries in the world would you find government owning hotels and competing with private entities. Some do have minority shares, for reasons being that when they have conferences and have guests and so forth, they can benefit from concessionary rates. But in 2015, it is not often found that governments own brands such as Marriott.
Minister Trotman, with regard to the reduction of the bridge toll, you indicated that the finance minister would give greater detail in his budget presentation. Are we then to assume that a figure is already arrived at and that negotiations will be held with stakeholders after this, or will what he presents be a result of those negotiations?
Well, government, as I said, examined several options that have been put to it in a document yesterday, the cabinet rather, and the Minister of Finance has now the guidance of the cabinet in terms of the figure or the scale reduction that we would be comfortable with and what we believe the people would welcome. It is now for the minister to work that out with the company and to pronounce on the final figure in due course, and hopefully it will be done during his budget presentation.
I just had a follow-up question in relation to what Chevy was saying. Just mainly out of concern for the fact that the Berbice Bridge Company, as well as NIS, has had some issues with money in the past. How do you justify looking to lowering these rates when they still haven't paid back NIS?
Mm-hmm. We justified by saying that this is being done to relieve the burden on tens of thousands of Guyanese who just can't afford to pay that. I mean, we've heard the complaints and the cries of anguish from parents in particular who complain about having to pay exorbitant sums to just send their children to school back and forth every day, 5 days a week. We've heard from farmers, we've heard from taxi drivers and others. So those matters notwithstanding, we believe that the interest of the people right now is paramount to concerns about NIS and so forth. But as I said, whatever we do is not going to interfere with the management of the company and the right of the company to recoup and recover expenses. And of course, I think you're stressing on how do we recover that which is owed by the NIS. Those are matters which the Minister of Finance will continue to pursue, but we believe that we must keep our commitment to the people to relieve the burden. The issues of the NIS's indebtedness or risk exposure to by placing monies in the board, and we know that there are issues surrounding the financing of the board. Those are matters that this new government will have to take care of and address, but in the meantime, the people shouldn't have to bear that burden any longer.
If I can follow up to Pushpa's question, government is currently trying to tighten its spending, and now we're hearing talks of a possible subsidy. Where does government propose to get the money from to pay this subsidy?
I smile because only last evening I saw a document where one minister seems to have gotten hold of $120 million in cash. There's a lot of money out there that we intend to recover to pay for some of this.
Could you make direct
No, I'm not going
reference
to make any more reference to it.
Travis Chase, Nightly News, a question outside of the statement. Could you confirm that there is another matter engaging the police regarding Minister Westford, and it has to do with multi-million-dollar illegal transfer of state funds?
Without prejudice to any ongoing investigations, by the day, things seem to be bubbling up from the deep. And one of them, indeed, pertains to the ministry, the public service ministry. I want to name the minister directly, but certainly activities around that ministry pertaining to the allocation of tens of millions of dollars is, I believe, actively engaging the Guyana police force, yes. But as I hasten to stress that we're not pinpointing a minister, we're looking at activities of a ministry which are engaging the police.
Could you say
the attention of the police? Go ahead.
Could you say if the current personnel officer who's to be charged in the vehicle transfer scam is also implicated?
I won't be able to say because we take a strong position that we don't get involved in investigations. As matters bubble up, as I said, from the deep, we hand them over to the police for investigation.
And this is separate from the legal transfer statement?
This is separate.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Kiana Wilbur, Kaiser News. Mr. Trotman, could you say, well, Cabinet would have received a draft of the budget. Could you say whether that includes a significant increase in the wages and salaries for public servants?
All I can report on behalf of Cabinet is that we've considered the Minister of Finance's draft and proposals. He is fine-tuning them. And I would leave it for him in a customary way to address the nation and to reveal any proposals or goodies that he may wish to announce. So I am in no position or have no authority to give specific details about the budget, except to say that we have considered the draft and approved it, and it will be presented very shortly.
But what I'm asking, I'm not asking for a particular figure. What I'm asking is, your manifesto, or one of your plans, it said that there would be a significant increase. I'm asking if this has changed.
No, nothing has changed. We're trying our best to meet our commitments where they're legally possible. And significant, of course, is a relative word. I can give a 50% increase, and someone says that that's not enough, I wanted 100. So we will expect, of course, that the Minister of Finance will make some announcements, which we believe will meet the general approval of the population.
You spoke briefly about the code of conduct for ministers and persons holding public office. Could you also state what is government looking to guard against, or what will this code of conduct cater for?
Well, yeah, this code of conduct, in fact, was prepared largely by me and others working in my office. We've looked at issues of transparency, corruption. We've gone through the codes of conduct in the Commonwealth and in other countries, looking at recent expenses issues in the UK and Canada. We've looked at Australia and some Commonwealth countries in and on the continent of Africa, and we've come up with something that we believe is suited to our particular Guyanese environment. So the code will, for the most part, address issues of misconduct in public office, and that could be fighting, discharging firearms, indulging in bribe taking. Those are some of the features that we'd like to capture in this code of conduct. In sanctions, we're now discussing, as I said, it's under active discussion, whether or not it is a moral code in the sense that the President retains the right to dismiss any minister who brings embarrassment to the government, or whether we, as some countries have done, tie it to the Integrity Commission, so that the Integrity Commission carries out investigations and makes recommendations for charges to be laid or so forth. So we're still discussing the sanctions aspect of it.
Yeah, sorry about that. A few weeks ago, we spoke about slowing the money flow, and you'd said that you planned on meeting with some of the persons in the business community to talk a bit about that. Can you give me a brief update on that?
No, I think that, thank you. Yes, what I would have reported is that the Minister of Finance and the relevant ministers will be meeting with stakeholders, the private sector, the Gold and Diamond Mines Association, and other drivers and accelerators of our economy, to work with them to see how we could speed things up where there may be restrictions or strictures. I know for sure that the Minister of Finance has been meeting with major companies and other revenue, others that make a substantial contribution to the GDP. Tomorrow, His Excellency has a meeting with the Guyana Gold and Diamond Mines Association. More proposals, of course, will be put to His Excellency, and I'm sure that the Minister of Finance will listen and, of course, make adjustments where possible.
Yes, and you had last time you had said also that you guys were going to meet with these people and have them see what areas they think this lacking money flow is happening, slow down rather. Has anyone indicated any specific area in which they feel troubled? Because you were saying you need them to point out.
What we're hearing, if I can, yes, if I were to use the forestry or the extractive industries sector, they're indicating lowering in prices, they're indicating that they need concessions, they're indicating that they would like duty-free concessions for fuel and for vehicles, for spare parts. So these are some of the things that we've been hearing. We have not heard from the retailing, like for example the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, any specific matters, but that's not to say that they haven't aired some of them or raised some either in writing or in private meetings with the President or the Minister of Finance. But generally for the big drivers, as I like to call them, these have a lot to do with concessions to ease burdens. You note that the price of gold has dropped in the world market, and of course there is the corresponding call for lowering of duties in that regard.
I wanted some clarification on the One Laptop program. I really wanted to know just where the entire project stands as is, how many people were actually let go, what is the current staff, is any activity actively going on, what will happen next. And we had heard Minister Harman had spoken at the Rice conference to a few reporters and had alluded to the fact that another batch was coming in, but we're giving to teachers. If you could just give us a full clarification, that would be appreciated.
Well, I can only repeat what Minister Harman has already stated, and that is that as he perused the documents and the files and the offices that manage the One Laptop for Family program, he found that no work absolutely was going on. There was nothing being shared out. There were tons of computers stacked up that were faulty for different reasons, and that government could not, in all good conscience, continue to pay. I mean, it hurts indeed, but it was not a political decision. We just could not continue to pay staff that was not doing anything. We are aware that a batch of computers were in fact ordered and are on their way. Cabinet has had a discussion about taking care of teachers in this batch, so immediately it moves from one laptop per family to one laptop perhaps per teacher, but it has to be tied to programs that ensure that these teachers use them effectively for training, for improving their methodologies, for delivering their curricula in a more faster electronic manner. So that is still being streamlined. As to how many people were dismissed, I'm not sure. I'd have to get clarification on that from Minister Harman, because that is not a matter under my portfolio.
Was the entire staff let go?
I don't believe that Minister Harman would be so unwise as to let go of every single person, because they're critical staff. You must have a skeletal staff remaining to take care of day-to-day matters where they arise, and to, of course, prepare for the second batch of computers that are going to come in.
When are those expected?
I'm not sure. All I can say is that since we assumed government, we were told that these were expected.
Minister, if I could take you back to the financial sector. Guyana is expected to go to FATF, or at least present to FATF next month. Can you give us an update on where we stand in terms of communications on the bill?
Well, there's no longer a bill, there's an act. The act was speedily passed through the House and assented to by His Excellency. The Minister of Legal Affairs and Honorable Attorney General is very excited about making his first appearance at the FATF conference, and the Cabinet has approved his travel as with the requisite officers who have to attend with him. And we believe that we are in good, strong standing. We received over the weekend an email with detailing a list of matters that have to be addressed by the country from FATF. Those are the regular list of things, ensuring that there's compliance, the FIU is in place and so forth. So from where we stand and plotting it on a graph, we believe that we are well on our way to restoration of credibility, if I can put it that way.
Sir, given the fact that you have some responsibility for the natural resources of the country. Could you say when government will look at the concessions that have been granted to certain companies, or if not certain companies, all of the companies within the forestry sector, and when you will look at how much the nation is actually benefiting against the millions worth in tax concessions that were granted to some of these companies under the previous administration? So when does government intend to look at that? And two, I know that when you served in the opposition, you had also called for the contracts between the previous administration and Bai Shenlin to be made public. Has the government pursued this route? And if not, when do you intend to look at it?
Mm-hmm. I suppose you mean by look at it, you mean take action?
Yes.
Because we have looked and continue to look at these matters.
Yes,
I noticed in today's newspaper, Professor Clive Thomas has made some pronouncements.
Yes, sir.
He does have responsibility for asset recovery and looking at government's arrangements in that regard. And so the question is whether the government is prepared to act on Professor Thomas's recommendations at this time. I believe some ministers would have learned of it through your newspaper, and it will come up for discussion in cabinet very shortly. But the point I'm making is that I can't stand here and say that we are going to be slashing concession here or concession there, but we are in fact reviewing all agreements and seeing where there's been compliance or where there's been violation and how we could in fact tighten up.
So I'm to understand that when you say all, you're also reviewing the contracts for Bai Shenlin and Bai Tarna?
Of course.
As well as the concessions they've been granted against how much the nation has benefited?
Well, how much the nation has benefited, of course, may require some kind of studied review, because, for example, we've got to look at jobs, we've got to look at taxes paid, we've got to look at concessions for duty-free vehicles and equipment versus what has been given back. We've got to look at value added. So that requires a studied review, but yes, that review is ongoing.
Given that sorry, this is my last follow-up. Given that you just mentioned value added, I just wanted to touch on that. Bai Shenlin, after 10 years, it's not established its wood processing facility, nor did Bai Tarna. So I'm wondering, is government looking to...
Oh, yes.
Because in the previous...
Both have been spoken to already. Both have given a commitment that within a matter of months they will be addressing the value-added concern. I believe in a matter of months. We're in July, and I expect that before the end of the year, the nation would start to see value-added products being produced by those two companies.
And if not, what action is government?
Well, then their contracts will have to be reviewed for termination.
Thank you very much.
Sir, we've been talking about the Guyana investigation, we've heard nothing more, and the state of the lotto funds. That was one set of things that you in opposition have to be talking about and trying to get it into the consolidated funds. Mm-hmm. Have you been able to look at the lotto funds, and what's the state of the Guyana investigation?
The Guyana investigation is ongoing. Of course, you're not just looking at a snapshot of a year, you're looking at several years, and you're looking at many aspects, from employment practices to financial accountability and so forth. So that is ongoing. A new board has been announced. It will be headed by Mr. Lance Carberry, who is a former board member and therefore familiar with the operations of the agency. But I don't believe that I can say that we are about to reveal that we've uncovered anything. That's not to say that nothing is there to be uncovered. Insofar as the lotto funds are concerned, the Minister of Finance is adamant and has the full support of Cabinet that those, as of the end of this year, will now flow into the consolidated fund. So many of these things just required a statement or a directive from the subject minister, and that directive has been issued. So come the 2016 budget, we'll find that lotto funds would be included in the consolidated fund. I did receive a figure, but offhand I can't speak precisely on it. What we did find is that many agencies drew on this fund for various matters, training, travel, attendance at conferences and so forth. while that may not be a bad way to go, we believe that it needed some streamlining, and there should have been some protocols put in place in terms of how and who and when, and for what specific purposes. As you know, the fund should be taking care of communities and building pools and making sure that little boys and girls grow up to be champion swimmers and tennis players if they so desire. Taking care of culture. You know, every year we see in Mashaman, we see what appear to bands calling themselves masquerade bands, and have very little to do with the old traditions. And I think that is where the fund should have been utilized for the sustaining of the culture and the arts. But we didn't see, even if it was spent, we don't think that we got value for money. So individual agencies will now be making requests of the consolidated fund for monies to be spent from it, rather than just assigning their expenses to that fund.
Taking you back to the forestry, log exports were up 80% from last year, and you're talking about also the forestry sector, people indicating that they need more fuel and vehicle concession. Kiana asked about Baishanlan and Baitarna. How is the government looking to tackle this actual issue? You can't have log exports up that high and then people acting like they're not making money. They're making money and they have no value added. We've been hearing value added for the past how many years?
Since we were children, yes.
Well, I know since I was a child.
Indeed, as you would recall, the stats that we're now seeing now were 2013, 2014 stats, and therefore we're happy that we have them, because we can now, as we have discussions, say, you know, your exports are up by 80%, and therefore you can't say that you're not enjoying good, good profits. So that's a good indicator in terms of, or a device, if I could put it that way, when we come to negotiations about concessions. What would surprise many of us, as it did surprise me, was the fact that despite the 80% and so forth, Guyana still remains below the threshold for national exports. What I think we're seeing really is the activity of one or two companies which appear to be quite large and perhaps even excessive. But in terms of the national tally, Guyana has not yet gone beyond what is nationally acceptable or by international standards in terms of the cutting of trees. So we're still within an acceptable threshold, and of course monitored by Norway and others to ensure that we're not going beyond what is an acceptable cutting rate. We're still within that rate.
And then my last question, sorry. For the parliamentary authority that is supposed to be set up to do the hiring of the FIU director and I think the accountant, the lawyer, and I can't remember the other guy. Has that been established as yet?
No, as you know, Parliament has no opposition up to now. We wouldn't want to proceed on many of these things without involvement of the opposition. We hope that they will appear this month, and by that I mean by Thursday, so that we can work with them. We can go ahead and name people and go through the process, but we don't believe that in a democratic environment that is the best way to go. So we'll await the opposition to appear, and if they don't, at some point in time we'll have to go ahead and just pass some laws and implement some measures that must be implemented.
So although the act has now been assented to and it's established, we currently have Mr. Gear as the head of the FIU and everything is operating as it did prior.
Everything is operating, but I don't expect that it will continue like that for much longer.
Do you have a time frame?
No.
Final question.
Local government elections, Minister, in the 100-day plan, the coalition government said they wanted to have local government elections at the earliest possible time, yet we find that the coalition is insisting on a date before the end of the year, while GCOM continues to exist that it needs 6 months.
Well, I noticed that GCOM's tune and the PPP's tune almost seem to be in tandem. We'd like to have local government elections as quickly as possible. We believe that they're possible before the 31st of December of this year. Mr. Rohi and some elements of GCOM continue to say that they need more time, which is quite strange. I would have thought that GCOM would want to discharge its responsibility quickly, having just come out of a national elections and with its machinery, in a sense, out of the boxes and oiled up and tuned already. But that's just my thinking. There are some laws and some things that need to be taken care of, but we are working and continue to work assiduously to have a date named, and I know that the Minister of Communities is anxious and will make a pronouncement, I dare say, during the budget debates.
But if I can take you up on something, GCOM has been seeing this since last year, when there was a discussion as to whether the period of time it would take to have local government elections. They've been saying since last year that when government says a date, they will need 6 months. So their talks now being in sync with what PPP is saying seems to not be related in as much, because they've been saying this since last year, when it was actually PPP who were saying we can have it at any time. So why not just name a date and then allow GCOM to work, even if it's early? Because the coalition government did say at the earliest possible time. And if GCOM says that this is the earliest possible time, why not just go with that?
Go ahead. Well, that's a matter for the Minister of Communities to address, and in his judgment, after consultation with GCOM and his other colleagues, and I dare say, of course, with the President as well, he would have to name that date.
Final question.
Could you say whether the government is reconsidering extending the Rodney COI, especially since we have spent millions of dollars, and one of the major...
Which is this, the Rodney Commission?
Yes. And since the WPA, which is part of the government, is suggesting this and calling strongly for this. And it might be viewed, the government's haste to wrap up the COI might be trying to shield one of its major political parties, the PNC, from any adverse comments.
I think you've got to look at the background to the COI and to examine its terms of reference, examine how much money has been spent. There's been tens of millions, hundreds of millions already spent, and I don't know whether I don't know whether the nation feels that it has gotten value for money. Cabinet consider this matter, and I'd like to say that Cabinet thinks and acts and responds collectively. In the Cabinet are members of the APNU and the AFC, and I believe that the APNU comprises members of the WPA. It has constituent members of the WPA. So Cabinet took a collective decision that this commission needed to be concluded to save Guyana further embarrassment and taxpayers' money, because it appeared that it was nothing more than a charade for electioneering purposes, put on as a show, as a sideshow by the former administration. The elections are now over, the show is over, the curtains need to come down.
Embarrassment, sir?
Embarrassment? Well, embarrassment that if after you would have spent close to $700 or $800 million, you really have nothing. I don't know that you have a smoking gun or you have a person who says, I did or I was directed by. That is what I mean by embarrassment. It has cost this nation almost $1 billion, and nothing of any substance has been produced. And I hasten to add, and without fear of contradiction, that 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years is not going to deliver anything that is earth-shattering. So again, do we subsidize the Berbice Bridge and bring some relief to about 60,000 people, or do we continue paying another $400 million for a few people to sit with microphones in front of them to look good? This vessel on the high seas heading to Guyana with 52 luxury vehicles that the previous government had bought. We questioned the wisdom of any government investing in high-end luxury vehicles, any government, and it was my responsibility to make contact with the Bihari group of companies, the designated importers of Toyota vehicles, and this would be about a month ago, I was directed to make the inquiry. I was told by a very senior executive there that there's no such shipment, and that in fact, one vehicle being purchased by the previous administration, which happened to quite beneficially landed about a week after the elections, and we've since taken possession of that one car, which has been assigned to the fleet to be used by His Excellency. But the Bihari group and all of the known importers of high-end vehicles, particularly Toyotas, I'm told they are, deny any knowledge of any vehicles purchased, whether by the past administration or this. But we're not going to do anything as ridiculous as invest in 52 vehicles for ourselves with entertainment systems and leather seats and so forth. We're all driving the vehicles and using the vehicles of the former ministers, and those are what we're going to use until both time and the budget allows us to upgrade them, which is likely to be another few years.
Do you see then that this is a part of the opposition to keep you busy answering questions when...
Well, it's part of the sideshow that they like to put on. It's there's nothing of substance, and I think every day, as I said, revelations keep being unearthed. You've got Sean Hines and so forth. So in someone's demented mind, to counter the Sean Hines' accusations, they've come up with 52 vehicles, and I don't think that it will wash. And the truth is, if there are 52 vehicles bought, they got to land at some wharf and they got to be driven out at some point in time. So we await to see where they are, and like everyone else. But at no time have we invested in, and do we have any plans to invest in any such vehicles for use by ministers or government officials. Thank you. Thank you.